I've often wondered exactly how much luck has to do with success in the music business. A lot of people will tell you, like you got to be in the right place at the right time, and basically you got to have a horseshoe up your ass if you're going to make it. And I know personally, I was lucky a number of times, just blind luck. Getting to work with Stompin' Tom, that was blind luck doing that at that time in my life in 1990 before, in between stints in the U.S., which I just kept, I was in that position many times when I looked around and went, holy shit, the chances of this happening, what's going on, But then there were other times when I had the worst luck, just and weird things would happen to me that were just were so. I don't even know what the word is. Just you look at a situation or a thing or whatever, and you can't even understand the underpinnings of it and how your luck could have turned that far south at that one particular moment that leads to something that lasts for years, And, it's like the old joke. The guy stops at the service station way out in the middle of the country, old farm road, this old service station, and there's an old fella sitting up on the porch of the station in a rocker, and this guy's from the city that's stopping in there, and he pulls up to the pumps, and he's really got to go to the bathroom. And he looks at the old timer, and he says, "Hey, you guys got a washroom?" And the old man says, "Well, there's an outhouse down the hill behind the station there. You can go down there, I think." And so this guy starts to go down there, and he gets down to the outhouse, and he opens the door, and there's two young fellows in there with an old man, and one of them's got him in a headlock, and the other one's molesting him. And this city slicker, he's looking in there, and holy God, he slams the door, and he runs back up to the front of the station, and he said, "Man, good Lord," he said, "there's two young fellows down there having their way with this old man in the outhouse. He's struggling crazy." And the old timer looked at him and said, "Yeah, was his hair red?" And the guy said, "Yeah, he was red-haired. And the old timer said, "Yeah, that's Old Red. That's what we call him, Old Red. He ain't lucky at cards, neither." Long about the time that Now the Work Is Done came out, a few things happened that were going to continue to rear their head for decades. One of the things was I was gonna have another run-in with my cousin Jarvis, who hadn't really heard from him in a couple of years, and didn't realize, and I'm sorry about it, I didn't realize at the time that how badly his feelings were hurt and how much face I guess he felt that he lost by losing the job, with me. But it's like I said in the video when I talked about this story initially, it was a business decision. It's something I felt I had to do to, bring the live show up to a different level. And he had been kind of stewing on this for a couple of years, and somehow he thought, okay, well, I wonder, mind you, nobody was getting paid for another morning, really, and there were 3 co-writers on that record. Now, they all had taken 20%, I think, of the songs that they co-wrote. I had co-written Along for the Sea with my brother Joe, because he had brought me sort of a set of unfinished lyrics that I finished and put all the music to and all that. So he took 20% of that one. And Fred Lavery had given me the chord progression, sort of not even a progression, but like this beautiful 2-chord thing that he showed me one night in the lobby of a hotel. And I took that little lick. I said, "Can I have this?" And he said, "Oh yeah." I said, so I went home and wrote Gone. So it gave him 20% of that. And then, of course, Jarvis had written, the melody for the chorus of the Molly May. So I cleared that with him. He said 20% as well, no problem. So there we go. So at the time that this was all going down, when I registered those songs with SOCAN was in the process of making paper registration obsolete. They were already pushing for people to go online, which was really early. This was very, very early. I had a computer in the house, but could barely use it because I had dial-up internet. And so at the time I remember the day I did this, I had to register every song on that record because at the time Borealis was telling me, this record's going to sell quickly, it's going to go to radio quickly. And I thought, Jesus, I got to get all these songs registered with SOCAN so that everybody gets paid their radio royalties. And so I filled out all the forms for every song on the record, including the co-writes, and just wrote everybody's name on them. Because I knew that we were already at the point where I could have gone online and done it without any kind of signature at all. It's all been an honor system for years now, right? And incidentally, there's never been a contention inside SOCAN ever. There's never been a legal contention. Because people, what's the point, right? We're talking about really, radio royalties are fine. But a song like The Molly May or Gone or Along for the Sea, those songs are not going to get played on the radio a lot. And, if you look back at the history of those songs, they made, $500 or $600 or $1,000 over being in existence for 25 years. They didn't get played on the radio very much. And as for the mechanical royalties from record sales, all of these co-writers were getting 2.2 cents per unit. So if I had sold 1,000 copies, they would have only gotten $22. This is another thing that people don't realize about this industry is there's not a lot of money in it. And if the only way you're going to make a lot of money in it is if you own the lion's share of a song and the record and the artist go multi-platinum and sell millions and millions and millions of copies, then you're starting to make bucks. A number one hit song on the country charts, let's say, can generate, and I'm talking a number one song, a song that goes on the top 40 of country chart and stays there for X number of weeks and sells whatever. I don't even know what that would be, but obviously there's a lot of sales when a song is number one. that a number one song of that nature would generate $200,000 to $300,000 in radio airplay royalties from SOCAN, and then mechanical royalties would be about the same. And the mechanicals would keep coming in, and the radio royalties, as long as the song exists, and as long as the record's being sold. So if you had a number one song, you're set for life. Like, you really are, you're making millions of dollars over decades, right? And that's even at a third. Because most of these songs in Nashville these days are written by 2 and 3 people, and it's split 3 ways. And the publishing house takes half of the money, half of the mechanicals. But all the radio play royalties belong to the writers. The publishers don't get that. So there's a ton of money in songwriting if you have a charted single. But as I've explained in earlier videos, I never got charted. And the song that was number 2 on the charts was one of my own songs, Another Morning. So I got all the radio airplay money from that. And I didn't have to pay mechanicals. I wrote it. And the same thing with The Island that went number 1 in Europe. That's my song. So I shared royalties with no one. And there was a lot of ambiguity about who was supposed to pay this 2-cent royalty with Borealis, right? Like, so I think the contract said that I was responsible for it, but the law about it is you have to know, the law now is that you have to know how much is being pressed in order to pay these mechanicals out to the writers. Well, nobody was reporting any of this, and I wasn't allowed to find out from the plant what was being pressed. So the payment of these mechanicals, which over the years probably ended up only being $300 or $400, because we're talking about 2 cents per unit sold. It just never got paid because I didn't know what the hell was going on with it. But anyhow, to make a long story short, Jarvis was pissed, and I didn't really know how pissed he was, and so he started digging around to see how the Molly May was registered with SOCAN. And in those days, I ran a publishing house. I felt it was important to have my own publishing company because in those days, I still thought that I may one day get a major label contract. And I thought part of even after everything that had happened with Borealis, I realized it was an independent label that just didn't have the infrastructure that was required to become, to make me be famous. So I thought maybe there's a chance that I might get on with EMI or Warner, because I knew these people. And part of the deal a lot of the time with major label deals is that they want part of your publishing. So if you start your own company and publish your own songs, when they come to ask for publishing, you give them half of your publishing, which gives them only a quarter of the song instead of half of it. So it's like a little strategy thing that everybody did back in those days to control it was a stop-loss movement, right? Something you did to protect yourself if you had to negotiate a record deal. Nowadays, I don't even publish my own stuff anymore because there's no way I'm ever going to get signed to a record label now, being a fat old prick like me. So anyhow, I had published all of these songs under my publishing house. And of course, I only published these co-writes. I published my 80% of the song, not the co-writers. I didn't want to represent anybody. I knew what was involved in that. And if they wanted to publish their own percentage, that was fine. Everyone's allowed to do that. So anyhow, Jarvis kept digging around and found the registration of the Molly May, and for some reason thought that because he wasn't privy to the registration, wasn't there when it happened or whatever, that I had tried to steal his 20%. And he saw my publishing company listed on the registration sheet, which was only tied to my 80% of it, but somehow thought that, I don't know what he thought. You want to know the truth about it? I don't really know what he saw when he looked at that sheet, but he somehow thought that I had taken his share of the song, which was not true. And SOCAN told him, no, your 20%'s right there, it's registered. But he didn't like the way it was done, that he didn't have any part of the filling out of the sheet. He didn't know it would get sent in. So he called me one day, and I remember it very clearly, because it was very upsetting to me that he was this fucking mad at me. That really hurt my feelings. I just wasn't sort of expecting him to be that angry over something that small. And so he accused me of a whole bunch of stuff in this phone call. And I remember being on the phone, and I got really angry with him, because I don't like being called a liar or a thief or anything like that. And I was driving around the Bredor Lakes. I remember I was on Highway 4 going up to, coming from Sydney, I think, going down off the island for something, and I got really pissed at him. And I mean, the conversation was just ridiculous. It had no sense at all. And I just said, Jesus, man, I don't know what you think I did. There's no way I would ever steal from you. But he kept on and on. I think I finally hung up on him. And when I got home, I started looking at the numbers, for things, and I thought, theoretically, he should actually be getting 25%, because he wrote 1/4 of the song, not 20% of it. He wrote half the chorus, which is 1/4 of the song, half the chorus melody. So I said, okay, fine, so by this time, this is 1999 or close to 2000, I think, I went online and changed his percentage. I raised it to 5% to 25%. And then I made an arrangement, like SOCAN actually grandfathered him and paid the extra 5% that he hadn't been paid up until then, which was only a couple of years of radio play, which was nearly nothing. But at least he had the right percentage. He was all set. And I thought that was the end of it. I really did. I thought that was the end of it. I thought he must be in touch with them. So they're going to tell him that I raised his percentage and he's been paid what he's owed. And I'm not sure what was going on. I just knew that really bothered me. It really bothered me, because I loved Jarvis. And he was just like a brother to me, and it seemed like that. And I'm going to take the blame for it. I didn't handle his firing well. And I was too busy trying to get my own shit together and do whatever. And I don't know. I don't know what I could have done differently, because he did get so angry with me, initially. And then this phone call that came a couple of years later, he was just angry. He was really, really angry with me, and I didn't know how to fix it, because I tried to fix it, but I didn't know how to fix it, or I didn't know actually the depth of his anger either. And this would come back on me, many times actually throughout the years, and each time it did, it broke my heart, because it was just like, why is this happening? Why can't we get this solved? But I'm sure there's people listening to this right now that don't know any of this. But Jarvis is a great musician, and his son turned out to be a great musician, Max. And it's just, to me, it's just one more casualty, because there's been many casualties in my career, in my life, brought on by fucking music. As many good things that happen because of music, some pretty shitty things happen too, right? But anyhow, at the time that now the work is done was coming out. Of course, we were free and clear, and I have to make a correction. I believe that when I started with Mickey Quay's, I was already actually with Pacan Entertainment. They were already booking me, and they did a tremendously good job. And it's a funny thing, right? I'm going to talk about this a lot because it's funny. And there's a protocol in the industry, and it doesn't seem to matter what goes on. If it's a booking agent or a manager, they follow a protocol. And it doesn't matter who the artist is that they're dealing with. They force every artist into that pigeonhole, that protocol, right? And sometimes it's really frustrating. One of the protocols for these huge agencies, like I've worked with every major agency in the northern part of North America. I've worked with Pacan. I've worked with live tour artists, Feldman, like the biggest agencies in the world, right? These guys are booking, like these are companies that brought the Rolling Stones into Canada and booked Natalie and Ashley and booked the Barras and the Rankins, and I've worked with all those companies. And strangely enough, so the way it always seemed to work when I would always be courted, right? See, the thing about me that no one might know is that, and it boggles my mind that it's sort of an unknown quotient, but I have toured relentlessly for 39 years. 2020 was the first time in my life that I was off the road due to the pandemic. I was literally in the middle of a tour when the pandemic struck. I was in Reno, Nevada, in the middle of a massive North American tour. And my whole life has been that way. That's what I've done since I was 13 years old, and I've done it for consistently 250 to 300 days a year. So you can imagine just the sheer amount of commissions booking agents would get from me. And booking agents loved me because I wouldn't turn anything down. I'd be like, hey, you're going to go play a fucking worm wriggle with your pants down. Okay. How much money, right? So, and there was some time, in the early days when I was commanding pretty goddamn good money. I would go, not obviously not on the level of somebody who was a superstar or anything, but I was getting $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, for festivals and stuff, and selling. I would go to a festival and sell, several $1,000s worth of CDs. I had a growing catalog, right? I had at that time 4 albums. And so, yeah, I did really well for all the agents that worked for me. But here's the protocol thing that really makes me laugh, because at the time it wasn't funny. Well, it was kind of funny, but as years went by and I seen it happen over and over and over and over again, I started to realize that, hey, wait a second, this is a thing. This is how these people do this. And it was okay that they were doing it, but at the same time, it would end up burning bridges. And let me put it this way. There's lots of things that my management has done in my career that they were supposed to take the heat for, but instead I took it. And I think if you want the honest opinion about it, I always thought that people who knew me would look at me and go, there's no way that J.P. Cormier is being told what to do. And so if his manager calls up and gives me shit, it's because JP told him to call me and give me shit. And it was never true. It was never true. So a great example. So I get in with Mickey. Mickey was a great guy. Mickey was he was a really cool dude. And as I said, we're free of Borealis. He puts all my records into Tidemark, which was doing a tremendously good job at distributing the albums all over the place and selling them, especially the new ones. There was some that was, I made records so prolifically that there was always something new coming out. And as years went by, it got virtually out of control. Sometimes I was releasing 2 and 3 records in 1 year. I never believed in the cycle of having a new album every 18 months and going through all this rigmarole to release them and fancy this and fancy that and publicist this and tracker that and all this bullshit. I would just make records as I felt like, because I owned my own studio. I had my own studio pretty well from the time I moved back from Nashville. I started out with a small 8-track hard drive recorder, a Fostex, and I converted the back bedroom in that little rental house we had into a studio, and I made records on other people in there even. Like I produced Ray Ellis, and I produced a bunch of stuff on technology that was really piss poor, But then when Pro Tools came out, I bought that gear, and I had a studio all the time. So anyhow, back to this protocol. So I'm bringing Pecan into the situation with Mickey with me. And so this was the first time that I noticed this. I sort of noticed it, I guess, with Max, because Max took Danny off our booking case and got me with Pecan. I believe is how it happened. And then we moved over to Mickey. And all of a sudden, Mickey suddenly had a problem early on with Pecan. Or Live Tour Artists. I don't even remember which one it was at this point. I think it was Pecan. And so here's the protocol. When you get with a new agency, especially a big one, you get courted by the main guy. In this case, Julian Pecan, who was the son of the founder. He was a tremendously good agent and a nice man. And so he took over my booking, right? He was what they call a responsible agent. But then all of a sudden, he downloaded me to another guy in the company and put him in charge. And so this always happens, right? You start out at the top of the administration in a company, and then once you get going, they hand you off to a lower echelon agent, right? Because these companies are humongous, and they have 100 artists they're trying to book. So the other thing is, they also expect you to hand over, when you start with them, all of your prior contacts and contracts. And so what's really happening is, and this is like one of the ways that the music industry is fucked, and nobody fixes it. So when I left, when I left Rave, Pecan took a copy of my entire booking history, all of the venues, all of the contacts, all of the phone numbers, all of these things. So not to book me back in those, which they did though. I got return gigs all the time, but they took all that information and put their other artists into those venues. See? This is actually pretty greasy, but the cost of doing business. So in order to get into this huge organization, I had to submit my entire touring history. They then have that information and those contacts and all the money we made and all the information about all of that. And they use it for their entire roster, not just me. So the first couple of years in a new agency is spent with them rebooking you at places you've already been while they try to see where you fit into their other venues that they've gotten from the other artists on the roster. It's such a game, right? It's such a game. But so we get handed down to this other agent who I really liked. I thought he was hilarious. He was a real cool guy. I won't mention his name. He's not doing booking anymore. But anyhow, I loved him. He was just one of those characters, right? And he did a good job for us. But for some reason, Mickey was like, well, actually, it's not for some reason. Something actually happened. So I was told. Mickey, we were in a restaurant one day somewhere, and Mickey looked at me and said, I called your agent the other day, and he had two phones going at once. So he was talking to me on one phone, and he had this other guy on hold, a buyer that he was trying to sell somebody to. So he was on the phone with this other guy, and he put him on hold and come talk to me, and then he would shit on this buyer, calling him names and making fun of him and making fun of his accent and blah, blah, blah. And then he would get back on the other phone and talk to this guy like, oh, yes, sir, no, sir, yes. Mickey took offense at this. Mickey was like, this guy is no respect for your buyers. He's crapping on these people behind their, like, just out of earshot. What if he had accidentally, shot his mouth off, and the buyer heard him, and he was talking to the buyer about you, right? He said, you don't do that. It's not good etiquette. It's not good protocol. He said, I'm going to fire him, and we're going to put you with another agency, and this all happened right at the dinner table, the lunch table. I was like, what? Wait, no, hold on a second. And he's like, no, man, we're not going to deal with somebody like that. He's going to be fired. And so he kept explaining to me. I was like, yeah, you're right. This is kind of dangerous. If the guy's trying to book me with somebody and he's getting off the phone, calling him all kinds of names and making fun of him, that's not very cool. So Mickey literally got up from the table with his cell phone, walked out the door. He dialed the agent on the way out the door, and I could hear him. Couldn't hear what he was saying. But he was on the phone with the agent for a minute at most. Walked back in the restaurant and go, he's fired. And I was like, holy shit, that happened fast. Like, what just happened? But sure enough, Mickey put me with another agency. So this is a protocol that has repeated itself every single time I have dealt with management. You come in with a whole infrastructure there, and the management clears it off the table, destroys it, tears it down, takes it away from you, and plugs in his own thing, right? Weird. It's just really weird how it works. And I think I don't know what causes it, but it certainly is interesting to see it all go down over and over again. And by the last time I was actually managed by anybody, about 7-8 years ago, I saw it coming and headed it off at the pass. But at any rate, enter a young lady named Christine, who I won't mention her last name. She still works in this business, and she's an incredibly talented person. I met her through Dave Gunning. She was doing some online. She was doing some work, some publicity work for him. And I remember meeting her for the first time at a mall. Me and Dave were in Halifax for something, and he had to drop something off to her. And we sat in the food court, and I met this young lady, and she was, a beautiful young lady. and seemed to be real keen. She was very nervous and I could just tell she was nervous, right? She was a nervous type of a personality. And so the new agency we were toying with, me and Mickey's, and on top of all this, I was telling Mickey, I'm going to start my own label. We'll just start putting my publishing company name on these records, Flash Publishing and Entertainment, and that's how we'll work. We don't need a label. To hell with the labels, and because we have the distribution, have the studio, can make records. We're plugged into the ECMAs and the Junos, and we already got all that. Let's just do it ourselves. So that was all fine. So then it started to come up into, well, why don't we just start our own booking agency too? And I said, well, how the hell, who would we get? Who's willing to work for next to nothing for the first year while they're building their base and their thing, right? And we had hundreds of contracts and contacts and names and numbers and festivals and venues all over the world. And they said, well, let's just get somebody, hand them this, this 10-inch thick sheet of papers of contracts, and put them in a room with a phone and a computer and let them go to town. And somehow we settled on Christine. And I'm just going to say right off the bat, right up front load this with, Christine worked harder than any human being that I have ever seen on my career, to a fault. She was diligent beyond belief. And I remember her coming into the Tidemark office, and they had cleared a little room, an office space for her with a desk and a computer and a phone and a file system. And she literally just walked in and was terrified. Her hands were shaking. She was a huge fan of mine, and I really wasn't that aware of it. But she had a lot of respect for me, a lot of respect for Gunning, a lot of respect for everybody that she worked with. And she came in that room and was like, I said, okay, here you go. Here's all the phone numbers. Here's the computer, internet, phone. Go to work. And boy, she hit that ground running. And I can honestly say that it was her work that would sustain my career for many years. I don't even remember exactly how many years she even worked for me. I think about 5. I think. But they were 5 of the most successful years of my career. Because not only was she a booking agent, but when everything else fell away in the coming years as she worked for me, she became everything. She became a publicist. She became my distribution center. She became my management, my agent. Like, she took over every job, and to the point where she was being paid $40,000 a year, and I didn't even feel it. I didn't even notice it was coming out of my bank account. And so that's an upcoming story. That's a story that will have to be, I want it to be here in the timeline, because there's so much underlying things that have to do with her and her presence in my life and my career. She was an incredibly stable presence, and one in a million, right? I've been lucky twice now in my life with people working with me. Her, and of course Ryan Hership, who works with me now. These people are so fucking rare, and she was one of them. But anyhow, I'll leave with a little story that I love to tell. Just a road story, because it was, I think the second time I was ever in Tuner in Denmark, the Tuner Festival, was hanging around with, and I don't know why this story is sticking in my head today, but it just is I love this guy. There's a fellow named Patrick Gillis, Paddy Gillis we call him. He guitar player for a Celtic supergroup called Biolik, which was in 1999 on in Cape Breton. These guys were mega famous, and they were toured all over the world, and they were playing Tuner as well. And Paddy Gillis is one of the best guitar players ever. He's a left-handed upside-down guitar player. He plays a guitar upside down. He doesn't change the strings over. He plays it upside down. And the guy's a friggin' genius. And one of the best people. Holy God, he's such a nice man. He's just one of the nicest men I've ever known. And he's humble, and he's funny, and you just want to be around him. And, of course, I was hanging out with him all the time for the whole week we were there. As many times as I get it with him, I would just be, hey, Patty, let's do this and that, and jamming and whatnot. And so a really cool thing about European festivals is that a lot of times, like if the festival ends on a Sunday night, on Monday, they ask the artists if they would stay to do, they have an extra night that's just for the volunteers of the festival. And you can stay or not. You can, I always chose to stay at these things. And there'd be a huge party and a performance. They'd open a stage, and the volunteers, sometimes in the hundreds, would be there being entertained for free, and you can just give your thanks to the people who put these festivals on, because they can't happen without volunteers. And Monday night was famous in Tuner because they called it curry night. They make these humongous cauldrons of curry, of seafood, and I don't know. It was insane how good this stuff was. And you could eat it with bread or rice, and there'd be a lineup of people going back and back and back for bowl after bowl of this shit. And there'd be, it would start at supper time, and there'd be all the artists who chose to stay would go up on stage and play sets and jam together and all sorts of things like that. And so, anyhow, Tuborg is one of my favorite beers, and it's brewed in Denmark, and it's their trademark beer. And in Denmark, when you order beer, you don't mess around. You can order 5 glasses at a time, and they have this little foldy cardboard thing that the glasses fit through, and so you can carry 5 beers at once without spilling a drop. And the sides of it fold up into a handle. You can carry 5 beers around, right? So me and Patty decided, and it was all free for us, free everything, and for the volunteers. And so I was going back and getting 5 and 10 beers at once for me and him. And we drank our faces off and ate curry and jammed on stage and jammed in the back. And so there was this one point, I've spoken before about how incredibly civil Denmark is, and it is. There was a drunk guy in the backstage, and there was all kinds of cabling and all kinds of stuff. And there was children running around and all. It was just a big, giant party. Well, this guy was pretty drunk, and he was tending to stumble and fall, and he was starting to become a little irritating. And some people were just kind of guiding him out of the way and putting him over in the corner, but he'd come stumbling back out there. And at one point, he stumbled and knocked this poor little girl. She was only 7 or 8 years old. Knocked her down, and she banged her head on the ground, and she was crying. And Patty saw this. And we were just standing there, and all of a sudden, Patty went into Superman mode. He saw that little girl go down, and it pissed him off. And classic Cape Bretoner, right? He runs over and grabs the kid and picks her up and brushes her off. And then he stands up and he grabs this guy. And nobody was being asked to leave because they were drunk. but this guy should have been. Anyhow, Patty grabs this guy and goes, he says, "Bye," he said, "if you don't get the hell out of here right now," he said, "I'm going to punch the face and eyes right off you." And I heard this line, and I almost died laughing. Punch the face and eyes right off you. It's still one of the funniest things I've ever heard. And of course, this guy turned out he spoke English, and he said, "Oh God, I'm sorry," and he left. He left, and the security guys met him and took him outside and said, "You just sit there until you sober up a bit, right?" But I'll never forget that. I'll never forget Patty Gillis running over to help that little girl and standing up and grabbing that guy, punched the face and eyes right off you. It was so funny and made me love Patty more, and I still love Patty. He's just one of the best musicians in the world, I think. And there's so many of these stories and so many of these things, that will come up, and I love telling them. It's actually, as this series goes on, I don't know whether we're 52 or 53 weeks now. There's so many stories that I'm actually sort of like reminding myself of because I'm telling part of the core story. It brings back so many memories. I'm sure that in the next few weeks, there's going to be like a show that's just me telling stories, like small. This is going to be like a novel, a collection of short stories, because there's so many things that were funny and amazing, and they come back to me. This exercise is incredible because it's reminding me of so many things, and that was the story I thought of this morning when I just could see Patty, wearing the bandana over his head, and we were just shit-faced drunk, the two of us, and having a great time, and makes me miss Tuner and Denmark and Europe in general. These people were an incredible part of my career and my life, and them and Shetland and Celtic connections. And just so many people, so many great people. But anyhow, there it is. There's another one, a couple more pages for you. And I didn't even get to the part of this that I was planning to talk about, which was really, now that the work is done, I'll suffice it to say, I'll close with this pronouncement. Now that the work is done did indeed come out, and it didn't sell worth a shit, and it's probably the worst selling record I ever put out. But for some reason, the songs became popular, but the record never sold, and it's really bizarre. It was a tremendous amount of work, and I look back on it now and think, my God, that turned out really cool. But in the long run, amazingly, it did absolutely nothing. And even now to this day, some of the songs on that record are echoing through the world. Like, they just did a version of Ancient and Forever with all the children up in Cape Breton, all the First Nations kids, and the same crew that did the Mi'kmaq version of Blackbird. Same people did Ancient and Forever as a collaboration between all the children up there. And man, like that, it's amazing to me that the album just didn't do anything but the songs, like The Fisherman's Daughter and the title cut, Now the Work is Done, and Angeline, and like so many songs in that record that really are alive and well today, but somehow the record's forgotten. Strange. I don't feel bad about it. I'm glad that the songs have survived, but for some reason, the album, not so good. Didn't survive that well. But there's always the songs. As long as the songs are still alive, doesn't really matter, I guess. before the sun. In darkness I had made my living, but it seems my race is finally run. An empty handshake I was given, now that the work is done. If my dad could only see us now, and the empty minds he worked before, he'd find a way to live somehow, but he'd kick somebody's hearts for sure, now that the work is done. Where have all the seasons gone? Buried by coal dust and clay. Where have all the reasons gone? The wind has blown them away. That wasn't on the record. So it's westward now, Ontario, a different tune, a different song, to a place where concrete flowers grow, in a world where you never will belong, now that the work is done. Where have all the seasons gone? Buried by coal dust and clay. Where have all my reasons gone? The wind has blown them away. I look into my children's eyes, Cape Breton's gone. There's only city, and I'll ne'er again be underground until the day that I am buried, now that the work is done. I was up and gone before the sun. In darkness I had made my living, but it seems my race is finally run. An empty handshake I was given, now that the work is